Wuthering Heights 2026 opens with a hanging. A rapt and excited audience has gathered to collectively experience a petit mort, including the man of the hour. This is arguably the most deranged sequence of the movie, and it quite rightly sets the bawdy, wicked, and melodramatic tone for this version of the story. And look, if this isn't your shtick, that's fine. I'm confident you can find something that better suits your tastes. However, if you're coming to an Emerald Fennel flick with a super serial expression on your face, I just can't. Guys, Madame Fennel is a troll. Her primary directive is to have fun by throwing characters into obscene and ridiculous situations. She's not Mike Leigh or Andrea Arnold. We're not here for gritty realism. We're here for pop-drenched color schemes and steamy ridiculousness. She's pitched somewhere between Ken Russell and Greta Gerwig. Her films are sleazy, absurd fun, not serious, weighty tomes. Exhibit A. Promising Young Woman. Cassie and Nina were once promising young med students, but Nina's sexual assault and the subsequent social and institutional indifference caused her to check out early, leaving Cassie with some deeply embedded trauma that she excises on nice guys at the club 7 years later. In the throes of her nihilistic pursuit, Bo Burnham comes into her life, giving her a sliver of hope that the world is not just cruel and wicked. After exacting revenge on a former acquaintance who said nothing, the dean at the college who did nothing, and the lawyer who bullied and gaslit Nina, Cassie learns to trust again. Until she learns from old video evidence that her nice guy boyfriend, Bo Burnham, was complicit in Nina's humiliation and assault. So she concocts a final scheme that, while ending in her death, allows her to reverse Uno all the fuckers who had a hand in unraveling both her own and her best friend's lives. Admittedly, I was hesitant to watch this film considering the subject matter and the director. On the plus side, the cyclical trap that is revenge is portrayed pretty well. Cassie could literally do anything, and yet she is spending all her time scaring men because it's going to have a long-lasting effect on them and change their creepy behavior? No. This shit that she's doing here is not affecting long-term change, especially since a good chunk of her grievance is over the failing of institutions. She's angry, she's sad, she's created a prison for herself. Love all this. This is great. On the downside, there's a bunch of on-the-nose dialogue.
Why are you wearing all that makeup? Do you mind me asking?
I don't know why you're mad at me. Okay, I'm not the only one who didn't believe it.
Am I gonna go to jail?
What?
What about the wedding and my job? Anastasia's gonna be so upset with me.
And an ending that begs, what the holy fuck? I don't have an issue with the ending itself. Systems that support abusers don't typically lead to cheery resolutions. Also, Cassie had pretty much given up on living for herself, and the betrayal from Bo Burnham was the last straw, so yeah, it makes sense that the avenging angel had a death wish. The plot and Cassie's actions make emotional sense for the film. The ironic pop music accompanying the revenge beyond the grave, I'm not super into that. It's like the movie finds this all hilarious. See? 2 women's deaths were worth it. No. See? We got 'em. It's just a bit... yeah. Sorry Baby is a dramedy that also deals with sexual assault and the social stigma that comes from being victimized. Now, they're quite different movies, but Sorry Baby maintains the seriousness of its subject matter while still cracking morbid jokes appropriately.
So it's usually best to go to the emergency room right after something like this happens.
Oh, okay. I will definitely keep that in mind for the next time.
It is possible to be humorous about tough shit while also not betraying the emotional truth of your characters. Exhibit B. Saltburn is to Wuthering Heights as Nausicaa is to Princess Mononoke. One is a slightly better photocopy of the other. In Emerald's films, Jacob Elordi is everyone's love interest, there's some kinky shenanigans afoot, there's at least one big fuck-off estate, social status is examined mildly, and there are kooky rich people acting like absolute twats. With Saltburn, Funnel Cake completely drops any pretense of being a serious filmmaker, whatever the hell that means, and finds her groove in the trashy, hipster, comedy romance thriller genre. I don't know how anybody got the impression that this was somehow a class warfare story. It's not. A middle-class kid craves the status of elites and murders his way through an entire family to get what he wants. He's feckless and shallow like the rest of these rich cunts. It's not so much an examination of class as an excuse to manifest scenes of power play.
So tomorrow, you're going to eat. And then you're going to stay at the table. Do you understand?
Yes.
And to be sure, Emerald Fennel is from an old rich English family, but I'd take this kind of story any day over Glass Onion, a film in which millionaires complain about the billionaire class. Most people actually making money from creative fields tend to begin life with an immense amount of privilege. At least Emerald's not being performative about it. Yet. Which leads us to Exhibit C. Wuthering Heights is ostensibly the story of star-crossed lovers Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff. Kathy comes from a family that is on its way out of the wealth game, and Heathcliff is a random kid that her father kidnapped from the streets of Liverpool to raise as his favorite child. As youths, they get very close running and adventuring around the estate. When Mr. Earnshaw dies, Kathy's brother Hindley becomes the master of Wuthering Heights and demotes Heathcliff to a servant, openly punishing him for spending time with his sister. After falling in with the Lintons next door at Thrushcross Grange, Catherine chooses to marry Edgar for his wealth and stability, rather than Heathcliff for love and poverty. In a profound state of devastation, Heathcliff runs off for a few years. He returns as a rich man, and buys Wuthering Heights out from under a now fully waste-oyed Hindley. Sufficiently cucked by Kathy's husband, Heathcliff marries Edgar's sister, Isabella, and so, each with a Linton in their arms, Heathcliff and Catherine very openly display their love and jealousy for one another until Kathy's tragic death. And that is where most of the several film adaptations end. However, the book keeps going, mostly on about Catherine and Edgar's daughter Kathy, and Heathcliff and Isabella's son, Linton. Also, Hindley's son, Hareton, who is mostly there to be abused by Heathcliff as a sort of full-circle revenge plot on Hindley. Heathcliff is the only survivor of the first-generation players, and so the second act of the book details how he commandeers two houses and wreaks havoc on everyone's lives. Among a handful of English-language variations, this story has been adapted quite a bit in film, including a Japanese version, a couple of Hindi-language interpretations, an Urdu language adaptation. Luis Buñuel got his hands on it, the French did one, and there are at least 2 Pinoy iterations. I mention this for no reason whatsoever. Funnel Cake's version of Wuthering Heights takes quite a few detours from the source. Here we have an abusive dad, not an abusive dad and a sinister brother. Heathcliff is stationed as a servant from day one, not after the old man dies. Nellie is aged down to be Catherine's companion and later servant, rather than being the woman who rears all of the Earnshaws and their descendants. Edgar is somewhat sympathetic to Heathcliff. Isabella's role was transformed with the help of a funhouse mirror. And the biggest change of all is that Catherine and Heathcliff do actually get their time in the sun. Like, she still dies and everything, but all that sexual tension does get some release. I'm the last person to point out that this does come off as a kinky Jacob Elordi fanfic visualizer. Emerald definitely has a crush on her leading man, especially if you agree that all her protagonists are self-inserts. Saltburn stares at Jacob with a rose-tinted lens despite what a nasty little shit his character is. You do get the sense that Funnel Cake once felt that she was an ugly, boring, middle-class troll crushing really hard on the pretty rich boy. The psychosexual drama in this movie is excellent. Everyone pretty much agrees that this Wuthering Heights is not a faithful adaptation of Emily Bronte's vision. It certainly has the dressing of the story. They say the important lines, the characters have the names, most of the story beats happen, but the context for all that is completely different from the book and the other film versions. Wuthering Heights is the wrapper. It's not the actual meat and potatoes of the piece. In all fairness, most big English language movies have wrappers, whether it's Marvel franchise stuff where it's a superhero wrapper to tell what is essentially a story about family dynamics, or a Shakespeare wrapper to tell the story of the trauma of childbirth. Like seriously, the name Shakespeare isn't mentioned until like 85% of the way through, and the man himself is mostly off screen in London. This is a rough movie about stillbirth and dead children, which Wuthering Heights also goes there. To be clear, none of the other 3 English language versions I saw did a particularly good job of bringing Emily Bronte's vision to life. The 1939 Laurence Olivier version is a decent crack, but it leaves out most of the edges of the book and just tells the story pretty flat. There's no opinion about anything here. The characters just do stuff. It does, however, accurately capture Bronte's obsession with dogs from the book. Then there's the 90s flick with Juliette Binoche and Ralph Fiennes. Despite telling the story in its entirety, I think this is the worst film of the bunch. It goes through the motions of the story without actually doing any of the emotional legwork to hit certain beats. In other words, it expects you to have read the book to fill in the emotional gaps, which means it can't stand on its own 2 feet. Each of these 4 films is guilty of this to some degree, but this version is the most egregious example of it. I'm looking at you, Heathcliff, eating angrily in the kitchen scene. To be fair, this iteration of Nellie is functionally pretty close to the book. She's just not mean enough for my taste. And finally, we have Andrea Arnold's telling of the tale, notable for having the only black Heathcliff of the English language movies. This one has the best and most book-accurate portrayal of Cathy and Heathcliff's relationship and social positions in childhood. This is where all the interesting stuff happens. The adult portion of the story, I care a lot less. I don't find this to be within Bronte's vision, primarily because the film takes Heathcliff's perspective, and while his child self retains all the spicy characteristics from the book, his adult self is infinitely more sympathetic than the adult Heathcliff of the novel. Of these 4 film adaptations, there's not really one that stands out as meeting Bronte's vision. The novel is about the rise and fall of families, generational trauma, and the facileness of tying wealth to virtue and value. All of these movies put the romantic element front and center, while generally edging out the broader themes. And the biggest missing piece from all of these versions is the importance of Nellie. This is a story within a story. A dude rents a room at Heathcliff's estate, and Nellie tells him the history of that wretched place. Everything is from Nellie's perspective. Because she effectively raised all of the children for at least some time across the 2 estates, she has emotional insights to the core players. And because she's been there forever, she knows all and sees all and is very much a participant in the goings-on. All of the observations about social class come from her. In the Arnold version, she barely exists, and while the films from the 20th century give Nellie a very functional role for plot reasons, they also choose to omit the more difficult aspects of her personality. But with Funnel Cake, here, Nellie spits fire at Cathy.
Oh, I'm going to die!
If you are, then be quick about it.
I think you like to see me cry.
Not half as much as you like crying.
If I were in heaven, Nellie, I should be extremely miserable.
Because you're not fit to go there.
Their dynamic and banter comes directly from the book. At 15, she was the queen of the countryside. She had no peer, and she did turn out a haughty, headstrong creature. I own I did not like her after infancy was past, and I vexed her frequently by trying to bring down her arrogance. In Emerald's film, there is no Hindley, Cathy's abusive brother. Without Hindley, Heathcliff's social standing is not risen and then degraded. He's merely a servant until he returns to Wuthering Heights. This makes sense, though. In the book, Mr. Earnshaw dotes over his newly acquired foundling while verbally abusing Cathy and degrading Hindley. It does make more reality sense that Mr. Earnshaw would pick up a street kid for free labor, not as his new pride and joy. Actually, in this version, Heathcliff's rise and fall arc is given to Nellie, which refocuses her role by giving her the class stuff.
Bastards can't be ladies, Miss Nellie. No matter how much their father paid to have them hidden away.
It's been suggested that Emerald Fennel doesn't fundamentally understand Wuthering Heights. On the basis of her changes to the plot and characters, that's a pretty dismissive take. As with most of the film adaptations, Emerald cuts out the entire second act, but she also cuts everything from the first act that would lead to the second. Namely, Hindley is removed entirely. If he doesn't abuse Heathcliff, Heathcliff has no reason to exact revenge on Hareton, Hindley's son. Heathcliff and Isabella don't get pregnant, and while Cathy does carry Edgar's baby, they both die when Cathy becomes ill over Heathcliff. Incidentally, this is why we need safe and legal access to abortion. The second part of the book deals with Cathy Linton and Hareton Earnshaw falling in love and being tormented by Heathcliff the Elder. In the end, the old man dies and the two lovers come together despite the generational trauma. In the 2026 adaptation, there are no children of the Lintons nor Earnshaws because there is no after in the story. It's all in the here and now. Funnel Cake breaks ranks with every adaptation by giving Cathy and Heathcliff their moment in the sun. It's a big fuck you, not to Brontë, but to Victorian morality. You should live while you're alive, not hope that you can live vicariously through your children. She didn't misinterpret the text. She completely rewrote it. And that's what makes a good adaptation, right? Recontextualizing everything with new ideas? As far as the whole White Heathcliff thing goes, there's no actual consensus on what race he's meant to be. The primary point of contention is when Mr. Lockwood, the outermost onion layer of the story within a story thing, observes of the now wealthy adult Heathcliff. He is a dark-skinned gypsy in aspect, in dress and manners, a gentleman. There's other stuff, though. Linton calls Heathcliff a little Lascar, or an American, or a Spanish castaway. So, a Lascar is a sailor from India or Southeast Asia. Nellie refers to him as dark a few times. I distinguished a tall man dressed in dark clothes with dark face and hair, and his dark face rather sallower and more composed. At one point, she tells young Heathcliff, "You're fit for a prince in disguise. Who knows but your father was Emperor of China and your mother an Indian queen." The word gypsy comes up 6 times in the novel, all hurled as insults at Heathcliff. According to my extensive research on Wikipedia, the Romani people originated in India and have traveled throughout the world, so I think it's simple enough to say that Heathcliff is probably mixed race and on the darker side of things. Case closed, the end, gute Nacht, ciao. Just kidding. I personally read Heathcliff as white, and here are 3 reasons why. 1. There are white Romani in the UK. Here's a photo of some Welsh Chloé, and here's a painting of an English Romani woman. The Romani are well traveled in the scope of hundreds of years. It makes sense that they would racially mix in with the dominant group of their area. I don't think gypsy here is so much an ethnic identifier as a classist slur. Heathcliff doesn't actually have a background, and gypsy is probably the most vile class indicator you can throw at a white person in those days. In a world where the Polish were very much scapegoated during Brexit, white-on-white colorism and classism is very much a thing to this day. 2. Nellie describes the Lintons as having fair skin and small features and yellow curling hair. There's this whole lily-white Lintons versus dark Heathcliff thing going on. We could be literal about Heathcliff's dark skin, that's a valid take, but personally, this comes off as a literary comparison rather than a literal evocation of someone's skin tone. The stuff about Heathcliff being Linton's lascar or Nellie's prince in disguise honestly kind of sounds like sheltered country folk saying things. Linton lumps lascar in with American and Spanish, both of which could indicate whiteness. Nellie's sentiment about Heathcliff being a mixed Chinese and Indian prince is more in a fantasy context. She's trying to cheer him up after Kathy rejects him, and I do believe Wikipedia said that Emily Brontë was into Arabian Nights. 3. Other books from this century are very loud about race. The Hunchback of Notre Dame refers to Esmeralda and her people as Egyptian a fair amount, and if you think back to Huckleberry Finn, there's a very specific word used almost 100 times to express Jim's blackness. Again, the word gypsy appears 6 times in Wuthering Heights to describe Heathcliff. I feel like if race was a notable part of his identity, it would come up like every other sentence. 4. It doesn't make sense to me that a Victorian-era man, Mr. Earnshaw, would bring home a non-white child and raise said child to be his heir. Remember, Mr. Earnshaw hates Kathy and gives Heathcliff priority over Hindley. Considering that the modern era still requires interracial and intercultural couples to debrief their respective parents before everybody meets, I really don't see Mr. Earnshaw bringing home a black or brown child and treating him well, and that going over relatively smoothly without everyone and their mother talking about the racial aspects of this. Again, this is a Victorian-era novel with characters who've never left the countryside. His non-whiteness should come up way more. 5. Ultimately, art is in the eye of the beholder, not the author, not some academic, not an internet person. Art and its interpretation belongs to you. So what does this phrase mean to you? He's a dark-skinned gypsy in aspect, in dress and manners, a gentleman. For me, personally, he's mixed but white passing. Someone on the Matt Berry spectrum of looks is what comes to mind. I'm open to other versions and interpretations, but we're at a point where the internet has said, if you think Heathcliff is white, you're racist. Okay. I mean, people in the real world don't say that, but the online gawkers do. And we do have a black Heathcliff. Andrea Arnold's version features a black child being abused by white people with all the complex subtlety of a lyrical 2010s indie movie. If that's your vibe, it's available. And as previously mentioned, there are a bunch of non-white, non-English adaptions floating around if you care to partake. I will also fly the flag for Amasante, who has made 4 films about race in a historical context, 3 of which are romances. And myself, I've been meaning to get around to Loving, but I haven't been. Honestly, I don't think it matters for this version of the story. There's colorblind casting and other roles with characters of varying social statuses, inherently removing race from the class equation. On the one hand, saying that race is not an issue completely disregards reality and how impactful all that shit is for people who are not lily white. On the flip side, if you wanted to explore Heathcliff as a non-white character, every other character inherently must be white, or whatever light skin colorism scheme exists in your culture. Point is, if we must have a black Heathcliff, Nellie must be white, which means there is less Hong Chow on our screens, and that's not good for anybody. I also imagine that people of color get tired of playing historical characters who are slaves and servants and stuff. Colorblind casting gives people a much broader scope to play with. And sure, you could cast a non-white actor in the role without the intent to address racist class. The personal history of David Copperfield sort of did this. I say sort of because that is a fairly white poster, and it's hard to watch the trailer and not draw lines between race and class, just on a visual level, but I digress. It's clear to me that Miss Funiculum Vulgari is a kinky bitch, and she wanted to explore the violent and dark sensuality of her leading man. There is this certain vibe that Jacob Elordi brings to Heathcliff of feeling unsafe and that being incredibly tantalizing. Like I said, Wuthering Heights is the rapper. This is really a movie about power dynamics. None of the other movie Heathcliffs bring that raw level of uneasy sexual aggression that is at the core of Emerald's film. On an artistic level, he's absolutely the right person for this role. On a financial level, he is also the right person for this role. I don't doubt that there's an English-speaking black actor who could be a good fit for this character. Actually, the kid who played young Heathcliff in Andrea Arnold's version would probably do well here. On a side note, I'm pretty sure Emerald got some inspiration for the power dynamics and the fetishization of scars from this movie. Anyway, the actor who played this young Heathcliff might have done well in Elordi's stead. The problem is, that's the only acting job he ever did. He doesn't have the name recognition to pull in a large general audience for a movie with an $80 million price tag. This isn't because non-white people lack talent in the film world. This is because white men have a disproportionate amount of power relative to who their audience is. Contrary to some internet opinions, I don't think the casting decisions here were cynically motivated. Hong Chow is everyone's favorite character actor right now, and Shazad Latif has a bunch of UK television credits. Emerald worked in TV, and she's hired other British television actors. This is a small, very specific cast. I have no doubt she enjoyed Latif's work prior to hiring him. A white woman choosing to hire 3 people of color instead of 2 is not the issue. The issue is that in the film world, and in general, power is not equitably distributed along race, gender, class, cultural, and disability lines. Things are moving forward. Sort of. Sinners made $1 gazillion and featured a black historical story that was not about slavery, but was historically inclusive of white, indigenous, and Chinese people. It's been criticized for selling out black culture, which... okay. Look, it was a fun movie, a little indulgent at the end there, but ultimately it gave Ryan Coogler enough money to make whatever the fuck forever, which, assuming he throws down the ladder, means there's another stronghold for black American filmmakers. The Wedding Banquet is a cute but feckless indie remake that was funded on the strength of its mildly representative Asian cast and was seen by me and 2 other people. And the 3 amigos have taken a bunch of American money to make movies, essentially pulling a kind of reverse colonialism. JK. I'm sure all that money goes back to the Hollywood bigwigs, but their success has definitely helped grow the Mexican film industry. The main thing, though, is that making films and making music and making art and making whatever has become much more attainable and equitable for everyone. It is very possible to make a decent quality feature over a few weekends with your buddies for a couple of bob. Getting it distributed and seen is a different story, but it is possible to develop micro-budget passion projects because ultimately they don't need to be commercially viable to exist. And in her defense, Funnel Cake does address race as class in Saltburn. Not saying it's super deep or anything, but it is there. Farley gets kicked out of the house for reasons. Maybe the core family can only deal with one parasite at a time. I don't know. But he eventually returns because he's a blood relative, so they're sort of morally obligated to let him mooch. Also, in a not that subversive twist, all the white members of the family are murdered, while Farley merely gets kicked out, his life fully intact. And that's it, really. Saltburn and Wuthering Heights are very silly and lascivious. There's some social commentary peeking through, but the driving force here is fun and chaos. Promising Young Woman sort of limps in that direction, but it's very much issue-tainment trying to cosplay as a James Gunn movie. They're gorgeous indulgences, and it's nice to see a lady director having fun, because a lot of modern female directors generally suggest that being a woman is nothing but trauma. Which it is, but the alternative is being a man, and who wants that? I guess one could be a non-binary kid, but that also comes with stuff. By all means, Funnel Cake's films are not perfect. Saltburn has that terribly condescending expository ending that explains the movie we just watched, and there is definitely a point at which Wuthering Heights turns into a music video, and it's like, yeah, can we start wrapping things up now? I don't actually need 20 more minutes of ravenous smooching. And we've already addressed the on-the-nose dialogue and cynical tone issues in Promising Young Woman. At the end of the day, I do think Emerald Fennel is making films for her teenage girl self, and I, for one, could use more visceral, squishy, and candy-coated fare in my cinema. P.S. I saw Wuthering Heights with a fair amount of high schoolers in the audience. When the credits rolled and the lights went up, they collectively emitted a bout of laughter, releasing the tension from the what the absolute fuck of the film. I think that, more than anything, really proves my point.